Warm welcome to all the participants present here. This is Neha, Business Development Executive from Quvae Research and Publications. To begin with, let me give you a brief about Quvae. Quvae serves as a platform to publish research articles in prominent journals and conference proceedings. We assist authors in publishing their research findings in high impact factor journals, promoting their work, enhancing their reputation, and building a strong scientific profile. As we all know, among several indexing databases, Scopus is one of the most preferred for publishing articles. The wide recognition and impact of these journals makes them highly valued in their academic careers. We have recently collaborated with a Scopus Q1 journal called F1000, published by Taylor and Francis. The authors can now easily submit their articles through our partnered gateway with F1000. It is an open research publishing platform for scientists, scholars, and clinicians that offers rapid publication of articles and other research outputs without any editorial bias. All articles benefit from transparent peer review and editorial guidance on making all source data openly available. And this is a gateway page of F1000. Now I'd like to welcome our speaker, Professor FROILAN MOBO, who is a graduate of Doctor in Public Administration from the Urdaneta City University and a graduate of second doctorate degree in Development Education at the Central Luzon State University. After obtaining his doctorate degree, he was promoted and designated to the position of Assistant Director and Associate Professor of the Department of Research, Development and Extension in Philippine Merchant Marine Academy. He also worked with different international research institutions such as Regional Director and Ph.D. Lecturer in Cell Academic, Malaysia. He was also appointed as the Editor-in-Chief of the International Journal of Multidisciplinary Applied Business and Education Research, Malang, Indonesia. He also published 12 international books in Europe, Indonesia, and India. Currently, he is working as a technical research evaluator by the Department of Science and Technology and has published 74 research articles with 48 citations in ResearchGate and 36 citations in Google Scholar. He is also an external peer reviewer in various international research journals and has been invited as a keynote speaker at various international conferences abroad and at international universities around the globe. Once again, I'd like to welcome you, Doctor.
Hello, good evening. Am I audible, ma'am? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I'll just share my PowerPoint. Okay, so good evening, dear scholars and researchers. So my task for today or tonight, of course, discuss the importance of similarity index in publishing research in a highly indexed peer-reviewed journal. So this is very timely, especially for us all researchers and scholars, because this will be able for us to know, to all scholars, for us to give an idea on how to determine whether your paper is highly accepted when you submit that in a peer-reviewed journal, especially in a highly indexed, which is indexed in Scopus, DOAJ, and ASEAN citation. Am I audible? Can you hear my voice? Can you hear my voice?
Yes, Doctor.
Okay.
You're audible.
Yes. Can we proceed? So on the first part of my discussion, on the next slide, please. It is very important, of course, to this for a scholar or researcher or an author to determine the similarity index, of course, using different platform. And it's very important to check first the standard of the journal. For example, in my journal, in International Journal of Multidisciplinary Applied Business and Educational Research, we set criteria on about 20%. So that is one of our similarity index in determining when we accept papers. Okay, so part of that, it's very important to first to use a platform. I think majority of the journal publication uses Turnitin. I think that's the most convenient platform that we are using because of its databases. So we'll just proceed on the next slide, please. On the next slide, please. Second slide. Okay. Ma'am, can you proceed on the next slide, on the second slide? So, it's very important, of course, in the Turnitin. When we say Turnitin, of course, on that part, Turnitin is the most popular detection software or plagiarism software which is being used nowadays. So, of course, not only in most publication industry but also in university. Of course, in majority of the research department, for example, in PMMA, we are also using Turnitin as part of detecting similarity indexes. No, so part of that, of course, when we submit our work or scholarly work, we usually want to check if the similarity matches, of course, okay, which is being uploaded or published in a published article or in a database. So it's very important to check it. Let's continue, please. Can you share the file, please? Sorry for that inconvenience. Okay. Because it's Christmas here in our in the so part of that on the part of the databases, usually we encounter matches which can be seen, of course. So it's very important for us to know on how to determine part of the similarity indexes. For example, when we submit papers on a journal or in on a university, it's very important to check first, especially when we cite papers. It's very important to check. So each instances of matching text should be examined individually for full and correct referencing. And it's very important to use platform, of course. Not only, of course, using Turnitin, but there are so many platforms that we can use. Of course, we have Grammarly, we have free plagiarism tracker, just to know the similarity index before we submit that to the journal. For example, in my journal, before we proceed with the submission, we see to it that we have to check first the similarity index if it matches the standard of the journal. So it's very important to check that to avoid, of course, similarity indexes or plagiarism. Because just like in my experience in the publication industry, uh, there are authors sometimes they submit papers which has already been published. So part of that, to avoid duplication of their work, it's very important first to check the similarity index if it matches, of course, from the database or from the published article online before we proceed with the publication process or before we proceed with the peer reviews. It's very normal to check first the archiving of work which is stored electronically. So there are so many guidelines which is being set. For example, in other universities, sometimes they set, it depends on the institution if they will set 10%, others they set 20%, others they set 30%. So that is part of preparing on how, of course, scholars or researchers know how to write papers, which is a scholarly writing, to be submitted first, of course, for checking before you do the publication stage. And of course, part of it, uh, the similarity reports, of course, provide, okay, part of it, uh, we know for scanning submission, of course, when we interpret similarity report, it is important to check the requirements. So what I'm saying is that uh, there are standards that we set because that is being based on the policy which is being set by the institution or in the journal. But commonly, part of that is we have to identify what are those of course part of that on how we can determine what is being what is a safe or what is a plagiarized article, because databases includes billions of web pages, which is both current and archived content from the internet. So it is part of repository. That's why in my journal, we usually require authors before they submit it. It must be removed from the repository before we proceed. Because other authors, sometimes they submit that sometimes their scholarly work is being stored in a repository. Majority of them is being scanned in a Turnitin software. So it's very important to check if the article is being stored or saved in the database, because once we check the similarity according to the report, it will reveal that the paper was being stored in a database from that particular university, or of course if it's either published in a particular journal. So it's very important to run your paper or their papers from time to time before you go with the review process, just like what we are doing in the Quvae in my journal. Before they submit, we have to check first the similarity. Okay? That's why part of that, sometimes when we have already checked the similarity indexes, we require the author to revise first before we go with the review process. It's a tedious process, but at the end of the day, we're looking for a standard or highly scholar paper which will match, of course, to the requirement, of course, of the institution, and also, of course, from the
Excuse me,
journal.
doctor. Sorry for the interruption. Which slide are you in now?
Uh, Ma'am, on slide 5. Slide 5, ma'am. Slide 5.
Just a minute.
It will just go back. I'm just starting on the types of slide 5, ma'am. So, of course, those color matches, as you seen on the screen, you would be able to determine the color that matches. For
Just
example,
let me know when to change the slides, sir.
yes, ma'am. So it's very important, of course. It is perfectly natural for a paper or a scholarly work to check, no, if it matches some of the article which is being stored on a database or on a web. So if you've used quotes or other referencing style, you would be able to avoid this. But there will be instances that you will be able to find matches as part of it. So you have to determine the standard. But based on this example that you have seen on the screen, it is already being considered. It's either it is stored on a repository or it is already published or it's being plagiarized. So it depends on if it's being stored in a repository or it's from the internet. So you will be able to determine on if it's on a file or repository or it's coming from the internet. So because when you run the database, you would be able to determine how it will look like. So this type of matches, it's not really acceptable because it's already considered as a plagiarized article. That's why in my journal, even in a repository, we require authors to remove it from the database, which is being stored online. And it's very important to set standard. Okay, can we move on the next slide, ma'am? On slide 6. That's why similarity reports provide the summary of matches or highly similar text that found in a submitted paper. We usually, as you all know, based on the screen that we have, those similarity which is being set, for example, in color blue, sometimes that is it means that your paper has no matches coming from the databases. So based on experience, 8% or green is a safe part to consider for acceptance or submission, because majority of the journals sometimes they prefer 10%, less than 10% similarity indexes. So if the paper already considered let's say more than 10%, for example 13%, it will be uh, subjected to minor revisions. So the author will be required to revise it. But part of it, when the similarity report is available for viewing, uh, the author would be able to immediately check. That's why, on my part, as the editor-in-chief, we usually send the complete report so that the author would be able to determine which part is needed to be revised or properly cited. And it's very important to do it because similarity reports have uh, many part which is very important to be considered. And reports that are not available may not have been generated. Commonly, words that may be generated, for example, the name of the institution, the name of the other known words, it can be duplicated. But it's very important for the reason that it's very important to cite your article properly. So there must be a way to cite it. And it's very important to do it because that's the proper way to cite paper, so that is to avoid similarity uh, on your submissions. So on the next slide, please. That's why of course the color of the reported icons, which is being based on the table that we have earlier, similarity score of the paper, which will be based on the amount of matching or similar text that will be uncovered. And then part of the ranges, usually it's based from 0% to 100%. So possible similarity ranges, it will depend on how much it will incur from your paper. So it's very important, of course, to check the matches that will generate. Okay? So that's why, in my own experience, in my journal, we usually check first. And we always inform the author that the paper is subjected to revisions. Sometimes it's not acceptable because there are some cases that authors, they submit it because they have the paper is already published. So it's very important to determine the similarity matches. So you can check the percentage based on that. And I think on the part of highly scholarly, when you talk of that, it's very important it's very important to check the matches which is being there. So part of that, usually when we have a green indication, it means that the document is okay. And if we have, for example, between 25 to 49%, sometimes we tend to send it for revisions. But if the paper is more than 50%, we usually reject the similarity indexes. For example, if that is between red markings or an orange, so sometimes we usually reject it. But it's a case-to-case basis because if it's on the part of, for example, on the part of on the repository, we require the authors to, just like what I mentioned a while ago, to remove it from the database and required him to resubmit it once the paper has already been removed from the repository. And again, we will check again if the similarity indexing or the similarity report is already meet the requirements of the paper. So it's very important to check first based on the table that we have. I think this majority of the journal in even institutions, university, they set policies regarding similarity matches. So it's very important to set standard based on the report that you have seen on the screen. Okay, because your meeting the standards of especially if you're going to apply for higher indexing. Sometimes they require this, they prefer less than 10%, less than 20%, based on the standard of the publications. Okay, next please. That's why how the originality report works is that green means that the acceptable Turnitin percentage for similarity score. This is the acceptable percentage if the report shows that that is below less than 25% or less than 20%, just like what we have set in my journal. We set less than 20% because if you're going to check the standard, for example, for the Director of Access Journal or the DUWAJ, usually they preferred less than 20% for the similarity indexes based on their indexing. So those are the minimum standard that sets on the databases partnered. So it's very important to set your policy regarding similarity report. So part of it, it will always show on how your paper is will, for example, if your papers matches green results, so it will indicate you that your paper will be accepted. But part of that, of course, it will depend on the tone of your paper, and again, it will depend on the requirement of the journal. Sometimes journal prefer there will be some stages of the paper will be accepted or it will not be accepted. Hello, am I audible? Can you hear me, ma'am?
Yes,
No.
doctor.
Okay. So it's very important to see the similarity report always. In always when we submit papers, part of it, we have to check the report which is being set from the journal. And it's very important to check it. Okay? Okay, next please. So just like what I mentioned a while ago, those color indicates that sometimes it can be considered plagiarized. Sometimes red denotes that the paper might be rejected or it might not be accepted. So those colors which is being shown on the screen, it will be it depends if the paper is coming from a repository or it's a similar paper. That's why it's very important to check always the similarity report. So it's especially when you write your papers, it depends on how you write it. Okay? So on the other hand, yellow indicates something a score between 25%. So if the paper will be flagged for 25%, sometimes it will be subjected for revisions, but it's on a case-to-case basis on the standard of the institution and on the standard of the journal. Because if we're going to check the standard of the journal institution, it depends on the policies which is being set. But if you're going to check the green, it is commonly being accepted. So sometimes it is less than 10% or 20%. So why do we need to set standard? Because that is the way on how we would be able to check on how the paper is being scholarly being written and which is being published. That is to avoid problems later which will be encountered. Okay, so next please. So finally, sometimes if you can write a paper which will later will be having a match of blue, which will indicates that your paper has less than 20% or sometimes 0%, and that is a perfect score. So based on the reports which is being highlighted, scholars or students should try as much as possible to maintain scores below or less than 25%. And if it's possible, to do it, just to meet the standard, of course, or the policy of the journal or the policy of the institution. Just like what we are doing in my journal, usually when we run their papers, we usually include that on the part of the similarity report. So before we proceed, just like what I mentioned, so we need to set strict policies because we are having higher indexing partnership. For example, we have for example, if we have an index of the watch, they will require the author to revise that your paper in less than 20%. Others, if that's a European journal, based on my own experience, for example, if that is a Scopus, sometimes it will require the author to revise their paper or to submit a paper in less than 10%. So it's very important to set standards. Okay? Next, please. So what is a good similarity score? Of course, there is no good similarity score if plagiarism can identify. Normally, a percentage ranging from 0 to 5 is considered acceptable by many institutions, but it's a case-to-case basis. And it is important to note that a low percentage may indicate that there are no sufficient sources on the Turnitin databases to check your work, because sometimes it can be excluded. If you're going to check the properties of the Turnitin, sometimes it can be excluded. So it's very important to cite it properly when we cite citations, especially for in the part of the results and discussions. It's very important to write it properly. Okay? That is to avoid higher similarity reports. Of course, if you will be able to lower it down, it's really good. Okay, next please. So, on the part of assess the authenticity of the papers, it's very important, of course, to compare student work against hundreds of billions of web pages and over 40 million books when we submit that. So it's very important to check that all is because, you know, other students right now, because of the age of the technology, sometimes they prefer to copy and paste. And that's the common problem of uh, students who submit their manuscript or submit their work. So it can highlight potential plagiarism and link to external sources when you check the possible grading interface. And you would be able to get answers quickly from those cases. Just like, for example, in my previous university, at the University of the Philippines, the institution, they usually check our paper and they run that on a Turnitin Plagiarism Tracker. That is to check the similarity matches. And also in other universities, they set standard. They will set, if the institution set, for example, less than 10%, and it's normal and it depends on. Okay, next please. So it's very important to check the authenticity of the papers always, and plagiarism prevention. So when we review papers, of course, submitted from a journal, it is very important to always to use tool from the internet. So for example, you can use Turnitin or other databases, plagiarism checker, and Similarity report is produced demonstrating the degree, of course, of the similarity. And it depends, of course, on the publisher, on the, of course, and also from the school. So on that part, you have to write your paper properly. And you will always have to read, of course, the policies and guidelines, which is being set by university or even from the editorial policies and guidelines. If the editorial policies, for example, require them, for example, less than 10%, and you have to comply on that because otherwise your paper might be rejected. For example, in a Scopus journal, a Scopus index journal, sometimes they preferred less than 10% upon submission. But if your paper did not match on their standard, your paper will be declined for submission. That's the main reason. It's very important to write it properly, even on the part of citation, because usually the main problems of common authors is they encountering problems during, of course, the in-text citations. So it's very important to cite it properly on what particular topic or area. Okay, next please. So lower similarity sometimes, for example, if you're using software or platform, uh, part of it, of course, it can gauge, no? The authors is asked to paraphrase that part of it, and it's very important, of course, no, to have a variety of sources, for example, and other part of that is it will depend again on the institution, because sometimes uh, the platform can all can uh, check. Okay, it can exclude referencing. For example, uh, you can exclude of course, referencing. You can also exclude similar other references. So it's very important to write it properly. It's very if it's part of your article. So next please. But majority lower similarity will be have chances to be accepted. On the part of higher similarity reports, of course, part of the submission, some manuscript could share a lower similarity report. But if you will be able to receive a higher percentage report, uh, it depends on if the paper will be subjected to be revised or to be rejected. So it depends on the scope of the journal, or it depends on the policy of the institution, because that is to prevent plagiarism or copyright violations upon uh, the processing of your papers. So it's very important to always check the policies and guidelines which is being set by the institution. Okay? And it's very important to check it. Just like what I'm doing in the graduate school, sometimes I set a standard of less than 10% upon their submission of their, for example, of their major exam, or even in the comprehensive examination, we usually set similarity indexing. Okay, next please. So Turnitin similarity, how much is too much? Of course, Turnitin similarity, of course, it depends on the institution. They can set less than 20% or less than 10%. Just like what I mentioned a while ago, there is no such thing as a standard, no? So you guys can set your own standard depending on how quality the papers you are working with. So it's because of part of that. However, this varies with institutions or universities, but it will depend on their variety of work, referencing and citation guidelines. But there is no universal specific similarity score that we can set. So it's up to you on how you will set it. If, for example, if you can set less than 10% or 20%, it's up to you guys. Okay. Next, please. That's why 20% and higher similarity, if it's really excessive, the paper will be rejected or it will be revised, because universities have varying references and citation requirements, but this differs in each institution. Just like what I mentioned a while ago, it depends on their standard. So you have to set your criteria or policies on that. So for example, if the research development R&D department sets a less than 10%, for example, for the article, it will be published in the journal. So it depends on them. Okay, it depends on the research council or on the research department. Okay, on the case of the journal, again, it depends on their policy, journal policy. But you always have to check the similarity indexing standard. Okay, next please. And Turnitin similarity varies from one university to another. That's why I think the most common database that we're using right now, or plagiarism tracker, is Turnitin, because I think that is one of the best plagiarism tracker, and the databases is widely being used from universities to another universities. In even the publishing industry, they are also using Turnitin as part of the processing of the publication. Of course, they they will it can determine the acceptable similarity indexes. They would be able to determine the degree of plagiarism and whether or not the submitted document is plagiarized. Just like what I have experienced, guys. There are authors, uh, sometimes the paper was already being published, so we could easily detect if the paper was already been published. Okay, next, please. So why a little plagiarism is good? Because it depends on your paper. If there is a citation or in-text citation that can justify the study. But that's why it's very important to have few similarities on the part of your justification, especially if that's on the part of results in discussion. If there is a area there to support the discussion, so it's very important to include that as part of the uh, justification process. And uh, so it depends, of course. So they determine the degree of plagiarism, whether not the submitted document is plagiarized. So it's a case-to-case basis. Okay, next, please. So I think it's already been done. Okay, next, please. Of course, what percentage in Turnitin is bad? Of course, other universities in journal, when the report is greater than 30%, so I think the paper will be declined, or worse, it might be rejected. Okay, so it depends on the standard on how they have set it, because the score considered poor. So any score above 49% is generally seen as undesirable, because it indicates that you have copied too much, of course, from the internet or other sources. So it is very important to write it scholarly, to cite it, which are those areas that can be included in your writings. Okay, next, please. So part of that, those tips for reducing repetition through rewriting, of course, you can use synonyms. So perhaps the clearest way to reduce is to replace words in flag. Or, however, you must be careful not to replace too many words in the same sentence, because it might have a risk of making your text less than readable. So you should also make sure that the replacement does not change the meaning of the or the thought of the text. So use these techniques in moderation to try to replace on that part. So meaning, it's very important to replace, if there's a need to replace uh, the thought, as long that the content or the thought of the sentence is still there. So, for example, if the author is trying to discuss this particular area, so of course the discussion must be clear, it must be concise, and it must be readable by the authors. Because guys, if your paper can be readable, for example, on that case, it will be cited from time to time. I'm telling you guys. So it's very important that when you write your paper, you have to discuss it thoroughly, and you have to include citations, which is really aligned or anchored to the topic that you are discussing. And later, as you go along the process, you will be able to know that you have already uh, received citations coming from various universities. It's very important to reduce, of course, repetition. Next, please. And another, uh, add or remove words instead of replacing a word. You can also add or remove from there. This is the easy way to do with adjectives. So if you have an adjective that is not absolutely necessary, you can remove it. So removing unnecessary words is also good writing advice in general. Conversely, you can also add an adjective or additional description to break up text flags or similarity that is to reduce your score. So make sure that your text is still accurate after any additions or deletions. Sometimes, based on my experience, if you're going to use uh, grammar checker software, sometimes it can help. Okay, it can help when you cite that particular author, but you have to be careful that the thought of the author must still be there. Okay, otherwise if you're going to replace the whole thing, the sense of the author will be uh yes. Yes, sir, you want to ask something? Okay, next please. So third is switches voice. There are two types of grammatical voice in English: active and passive. So on the other hand, it's very important to use it properly. Uh, that is to avoid, of course, that is to reduce repetition. Then you can rewrite a sentence based from the. Okay, so it depends on that part. Next, please. Then part of that is the reordering of the list on that part. So when you write your paper, it's very important to reorder that your citation. So based on the report. Okay, next please. Next please. The order is next please. So bearing sentence structure is very important. Is one of the most powerful ways to quickly reduce similarity. But there is a trick to use that. Sometimes you can use Grammarly to reduce or other grammar checker to reduce similarity cases. So when doing this, be sure that the sentence is still easy to understand and it has a meaning, it has a thought. So it's very important to vary sentence structure. Okay, next please. Next slide. So next please. So use a variety of transition words. If there's a platform that you can use, then we can use it. Part of the transition words, for example, or you can use to link sentences together and help the reader follow the logic of your manuscript and include terms such as, for example, moreover, furthermore, however, or any other words that can help, okay, that can interchange and use correctly using a variety of them when there's a part of it must be included, for example, in the methodology or in the discussion, which can reduce the similarity on your manuscript, which can be readable easier. Next, please. So use specific words instead of pronouns. So if you use a pronoun, you can use the following on those sections that you can replace with a specific word what you are trying to refer. And this is also good general writing advice when you make your writing more clear on that part. And replacing specific words will be able to reduce similarity as part of the discussions and the writing process. Next, please. So of course, another is simply or expand phrases. So often short phrases can be reduced to a single word, while it is generally good writing advice to write as simple and concisely as possible. If necessary, you can also expand one simple word into a short phrase instead, but both strategies can help you to reduce your similarity score. For example, if you cite it properly. Okay, next, please. Then you can combine those multiple strategies that you have done, and you can repeat it again. That is to reduce similarity score. And the most effective way is to accomplish this to combine multiple strategy in the same cases. Okay. Next, please. The next slide. So that would be all on my part. So that would be the last part. So if you have any questions, you can ask me. Let's go now on let's proceed on the question and answers Q&A part. If you have any questions, you can ask now on the part of the similarity reports. Yes, sir. You want to ask something? The one who's raising the hand. Yes, sir.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Hello.
Yes, sir. We can hear you.
Okay. I have two questions. Sometimes I have seen some software included the bibliography. That's why the similarity index is going higher. Basically in biological field.
So can you type your question on the chat box, sir, so we can understand it?
Okay.
We cannot understand your question, sir. If you can type that in the chat box so that we can understand it. Can you type it on the chat box? Because we cannot really hear you, sir, hear your voice. If you can just type it on the chat box so that we can understand it. And we'll just get back to you. Any other more questions? So on the first, any other more questions? So if you want to ask questions, you can just raise your hand or you can just key in your questions on the chat box. On the part of the first, anybody from the group? So yes, the question is sometimes we see the similarity go higher due to, yeah, that's really right. The question is that sometimes we really see similarity go, that the technique there is you can exclude it, sir. If for example, if you're using Turnitin, you can exclude on the part of the settings. So that is to avoid references and bibliography, because if you're not going to exclude bibliography, it will be added. It will be considered as part of the similarity report. It will be added on the plagiarism part. So part of that, there are some cases that we need to include or exclude, of course, the bibliography. Yeah, of course, the exclusion is accepted by the journal. It depends on the case. If it's part of the referencing, definitely it will be accepted. Okay, it's accepted, sir. It's a case-to-case basis, because the journal sometimes, if you will submit your paper, they will weigh your paper. They will check if the similarity reports will be coming from the referencing, or if it will be on the part of the results and discussion. So it's a case-to-case basis. So is there any recommended free tools? Yeah, there are so many free tools. For example, you can use duplicchecker.com. I think Grammarly can also do it. But you know, guys, the most common that we're using on the part of the plagiarism tracker is Turnitin. But there are also some free similarity tools that you can use on, which is the duplicate checker. That is the #1 platform which is being used nowadays. Okay, another question, please. Do you have any more questions? Any more questions or any more clarification when it comes to similarity indexes? So, similarity on the part of the journal publication. So, similarity is very important, especially, for example, in the case of our journal. It is very important when we apply for higher indexing. No? For example, in our case, we are on the process now to index our journal to hopefully in Scopus by next year. So it's one part that we need to set similarity indexes. So because of the higher accreditation or higher indexing that we are applying. So it's normal that when we go above on the requirement of the of other databases, so we have to set compliances based on the reports that we are submitting on. So I hope that authors can understand on that part. Any more questions? Any more questions, guys? That's why when you before you submit your paper. Okay. Another question here is I'm having problem with keywords or scientific terms. Checking software taking them into account whereas they cannot be removed or other from as a similar result. How to resolve that? I think the best way to do it, sir, is to replace it, of course, or you can exclude it. Okay, there are cases that you can either exclude those areas or you can replace it. Those are two meaning helpful uh, process which you can do. Okay. Are there any more questions? Any more questions? I hope that that this session will be able to help you guys, especially when you submit your article for possible publication in, for example, in Scopus, in Citation, or other higher databases. So I think that would be all on my part. If you have any questions, you can email me. Or you can, is there any free similar? Yes, of course. Other than, just like what I mentioned a while ago, you can use DupliChecker, sir, duplichecker.com. Any more questions? I think if none, that would be all on my part. Thank you for listening, and I hope I've helped you and I've shared something which can help you on the part of your journey in research and publication. That's all.
Thank you, Doctor. That was a thought-provoking talk on the concepts. Thank you for imparting your knowledge and remarks on importance of similarity index in publishing research in highly indexed peer-reviewed journals. Your examples were fascinating, and the slides you showed gave us a clear understanding that we couldn't have gained in any other. On behalf of Quvae Research and Publications, I extend our gratitude for sharing and sparing your time and thoughts with us, Doctor. Thank you once again, and Merry Christmas. Participants will receive your certificate and presentation document within 7 to 10 working days. Thank you.
Thank you and Merry Christmas, guys. Thank you.